My daughter-in-law handed my wife a laminated Christmas dinner list with 22 dishes on it and told her the good china wasn't optional this year, so I quietly bought us 2 tickets to Lisbon and left the key to an empty house under the mat. Her voicemail came in halfway through our second bottle of Vinho Verde. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 58 years old, and I spent 31 years as a claims investigator for one of the largest insurance companies in the country, which means I spent 3 decades learning exactly how people hide what they don't want found. Folks, before I get into this, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you've ever had a family member try to work you like you were staff instead of blood, hit that like button because you already know where this one's going. The kitchen light was still on at 11 at night when I found her. My wife Carol was standing at the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder, and she didn't hear me come in because the exhaust fan was roaring over the stove. She had flour on her forearms up to the elbow. Her hip, the same hip that had been replaced 8 months earlier, the same hip she'd spent half a year in physical therapy rebuilding, was locked at an angle I didn't like. The angle she uses when she's trying to keep weight off one side without admitting she's doing it. There were 3 casserole dishes cooling on trivets. There was a turkey breast resting under foil. There was a list taped to the cabinet above the sink, printed on cardstock, laminated like a museum placard, with 22 items on it in a font I recognize because our daughter-in-law Caitlin uses it on everything, including the wedding invitations she made us pay for. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched my wife of 36 years work a shift she never agreed to. Carol and I raised one son, Tyler, and we didn't do it perfectly, but we did it with love. And somewhere in the last 3 years since he married Caitlin, that love got treated like a line of credit. It started small. Caitlin wanted to host Christmas at our house instead of their apartment because, in her words, our dining room photographed better. Fine. Carol said yes, because Carol says yes to everything. Because Carol is the kind of woman who thinks hospitality is a form of love, and I've spent our whole marriage grateful for that and, apparently, not grateful enough to notice when it was being used against her. What I noticed that night, standing in the doorway of my own kitchen, was that Caitlin hadn't come over to help. She dropped off the list 2 days earlier, along with a text that said Carol should probably get started early since there's a lot on there. And then she and Tyler had gone to a hotel spa for the weekend to decompress before hosting family. Carol had been in that kitchen for 6 hours, alone, on a hip that wasn't finished healing, making a dinner for people who wouldn't lift a finger and wouldn't say thank you, because thanking the help isn't something you do. I walked over and took the wooden spoon out of her hand before she even registered I was there. She jumped a little, then laughed it off, the way she always does, like her own exhaustion is something to apologize for. I turned off the exhaust fan. The silence that came down over that kitchen was heavier than any argument we've ever had. Go sit down, I told her. Not a request. She looked at me, and something in my face must have told her this wasn't the moment to argue, because she went and sat at the kitchen table without a word, which for Carol is its own kind of confession. I called Tyler. It rang 4 times. I could hear pool noise in the background, someone laughing, the particular ambient sound of a hotel bar that costs $18 a mojito. My son picked up like I was interrupting something important. Dad, hey, what's up? We're kind of in the middle of something. I asked him if he knew his mother was still awake cooking a 22-item Christmas dinner at 11 o'clock at night by herself, 8 months after hip surgery, and I told him so, plainly. No heat in my voice. The way I used to deliver bad news to a claimant who thought I hadn't found the discrepancy in their file yet. He sighed. That sigh did more damage to me than anything he actually said. It was the sigh of a man being mildly inconvenienced by his own mother's pain. Dad, it's not that deep. Caitlin's parents are important to her career. This dinner matters. Mom's probably just being dramatic. She does that. I hung up. I didn't yell. I didn't say another word. I just set the phone down on the counter, gently, like it was evidence I needed to preserve for later, because in my head, that's exactly what it had become. Carol was still at the table when I came back, staring at her own hands like she was trying to remember whose they were. I got her a glass of water and sat down across from her, and I watched 36 years of a woman who never once asked for anything for herself finally look, for just a second, like she understood she'd been asking for too little. I didn't sleep that night. I went into my study instead, the one room in the house that's still entirely mine, and I opened my laptop. Before I retired, my entire career was built around one skill: following money that didn't want to be followed. Fraudulent claims don't announce themselves. They hide in decimal points, in timing, in patterns that look normal, until you know what normal actually looks like. I know how to read a paper trail the way other men read a box score. 2 years back, Carol and I had co-signed a small business loan for Tyler and Caitlin so they could open the boutique fitness studio Caitlin had been talking about since their wedding. We'd also set up a joint account, modest, meant strictly as a cushion for Carol's ongoing medical costs, her physical therapy co-pays, the second hip surgery her doctor said was likely 2 years out. It had my name on it as a safeguard. It was supposed to be untouchable. It wasn't untouchable. It had been touched plenty. I pulled the statements. What I found wasn't a single desperate withdrawal, the kind you forgive because life happens. It was a pattern, small transfers, spaced out, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered an alert if the bank still watched these things closely, which, thank God for me and God help them, it still does if you know where to look. 9 months of it. I traced the destination, not the fitness studio. A leasing company for luxury vehicles and a country club initiation fee 2 towns over, the kind of club Caitlin's parents belonged to, the kind of club Caitlin had been dying to get into so she'd stop feeling like the poor daughter-in-law at her own parents' table. My son had been draining his mother's surgery fund to buy his way into looking rich in front of people who didn't respect him enough to help their own daughter host a family dinner. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you I felt rage, something hot and immediate, but that's not honest. What I felt was colder than that. It was the specific, terrible clarity of a man who has just finished an audit and found exactly what he suspected he'd find, and now has to decide what he's willing to do about it. The front door opened without a knock the next morning. Caitlin let herself in. She still had a key from house sitting 2 summers ago, a key nobody had ever bothered to ask for back because we're the kind of people who trust family. And she walked straight past me into the kitchen where Carol was resting with a heating pad on her hip. Caitlin was holding a garment bag over one shoulder, already talking about seating charts, already asking whether Carol had ironed the tablecloth yet, and when Carol said she hadn't had the chance, Caitlin's face did something I won't forget. A flicker of pure, unbothered irritation, like she'd just been told the help had called in sick. I stepped into the kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. "Caitlin," I said, "you and Tyler are going to need to find another house for Christmas dinner this year." She actually laughed. She said something about how I was being dramatic, how this was a whole family tradition now, how her parents were already planning their outfits. I let her finish. I've sat across from professional liars for 31 years. And the thing about people like Caitlin is, they've never once had to sit in a room with someone who already knows the answer before they've finished the question. I told her I knew about the transfers. I watched the color leave her face in real time, the exact way it does when a claimant realizes the adjuster across the table has already seen the surveillance footage. She didn't apologize. She got angry instead, which told me everything I needed to know about the last 3 years. She said the money was Tyler's to use, that we'd given it to them, that I had no right to track it. I told her that a safeguard for my wife's surgery is not a business investment, and that tracking money is, in fact, the one thing in this world I am genuinely good at. I asked her to leave. She did, eventually, once it was clear I wasn't going to raise my voice no matter how loud she got, because loud only works on people who are afraid of the silence underneath it, and I have never once in my life been afraid of silence. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls, and I made them the way I used to close out a fraud case: clean, sequential, no room left for appeal. The first call was to the bank. I moved every remaining dollar out of that joint account and into a new one that required both my signature and Carol's, and nobody else's, ever again. It took 11 minutes. The second call was to the loan officer who'd handled the business loan we'd co-signed. I won't bore you with the mechanics of a personal guarantee, but I will tell you this. When you co-sign a loan, you are exposed to that debt exactly as much as the primary borrower is, and you have every legal right to request a review of the account if you believe the funds are being misused. I requested that review. I also, calmly, began the paperwork to remove myself as guarantor going forward, which meant the studio's line of credit would freeze the moment the current draw period closed, unless Tyler and Caitlin could requalify on their own financials. I already knew, from what I'd traced, that they couldn't. The third call was to the caterer Caitlin had booked under our address for the Christmas dinner, the one she'd told to bill the Callahan house directly. I canceled it. I paid the cancellation fee myself, out of my own pocket, gladly, because some things are worth the cost just for the certainty of it. Then I went and found Carol, who was still on the couch with her heating pad, watching all of this unfold with the kind of stillness she gets when she's trying to decide if she's allowed to feel what she's feeling. "Pack a bag," I told her. "Something warm during the day, something warmer at night." She asked me what I was talking about. I told her we were going to Lisbon for 11 days and that I'd already booked it first class that morning while Caitlin was still standing in our kitchen asking about tablecloths. I want you to understand something about my wife. In 36 years, I have never once seen Carol cry from joy. I've seen her cry plenty of other ways: grief, frustration, the specific exhaustion of being needed by everyone and asked after by no one. But that afternoon, sitting on our couch with a heating pad still strapped to her hip, she cried the kind that comes out sideways because you don't quite trust it. We left 3 days later. I left one thing behind, on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot where the laminated dish list used to be taped to the cabinet. A single note, 4 sentences long, informing Tyler and Caitlin that Christmas dinner would not be happening at our house this year, that the joint account had been restructured, that the loan guarantee was under formal review, and that we would be unreachable for the next week and a half. I didn't sign it, Dad. I signed it, Robert. The flight was long. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Carol fell asleep with her head on my shoulder for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I sat there in the dark cabin thinking about the specific kind of love that gets mistaken for weakness by the people who benefit most from it. Lisbon in December is not warm, but it is soft. Golden light on old tile, the smell of roasting chestnuts on every corner, the Tagus River wide and gray-blue under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and sun. We stayed in a small hotel in Alfama with a view of red rooftops stacked down toward the water, and on our first morning there, I watched Carol stand on the balcony in a coat that was too big for her, holding a coffee with both hands, and I watched 3 years of tension leave her shoulders in real time, the way frost leaves a window when the sun finally hits it. We didn't talk about home. That was the rule I set for myself, and mostly I kept it. We ate dinner at 7, which felt criminally early for 2 Americans, and we walked until our feet hurt, and Carol laughed at things, actually laughed, not the polite laugh she does for other people for the first time in longer than either of us wanted to admit out loud. I kept my phone in the hotel safe. I checked it once a day, in the evening, alone, on the balcony, while Carol was in the shower, because some things a man should absorb before he lets them into the room with his wife. The first day, it was Tyler, furious, demanding to know what I'd done, insisting I had no right, insisting Caitlin was devastated, insisting her parents were humiliated by the cancellation. I deleted it. By the third day, the tone had shifted. Tyler's voice had lost its edge and picked up something closer to panic. The studio's line of credit had frozen exactly as I'd predicted. He was asking, quietly now, whether there was any way to talk about the guarantor situation, whether we could figure something out. I deleted that one too, but I noticed my hand shook a little when I did it, and I let myself feel that because pretending it doesn't cost you anything is its own kind of lie. By the 6th day, Caitlin had started calling. I hadn't expected that. Her voicemails were long, and they were not apologies so much as explanations, the kind where every sentence starts with "I just" and ends with someone else's fault. I just wanted a nice Christmas. I just didn't think it was a big deal. I just didn't know Carol's hip was that bad. I listened to each one exactly once, standing on that balcony with the Tagus turning silver in the last light, and I felt the particular calm of a man reviewing a file he already knows how to close. On the 7th night, Carol found me out there. She didn't ask what I was doing. She sat down next to me, took the phone out of my hand, gently, the way I'd taken the spoon out of hers, and set it face down on the table between us. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight is ours." We stayed 12 days instead of 11. I extended it without telling her until the morning we were supposed to fly home, and when I told her over breakfast that our flight wasn't until the following evening, she looked at me across a plate of pastel de nata, like I'd just told her something she'd needed to hear her whole life. When we finally did fly home, I drove straight from the airport to Tyler and Caitlin's apartment, alone, while Carol rested. I'd had 11 days to think about what I was going to say, and none of it was going to be shouted. Tyler opened the door looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week and a half. Caitlin stood behind him in the hallway, arms crossed, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't say anything at all. I didn't come inside. I stood on the landing and I told my son the truth, plainly. the way I've told hard truths to strangers for 3 decades and somehow never learned to say to my own family until now. I told him that his mother had spent 36 years making sure he never once had to wonder if he was loved, and that the debt for that kind of love doesn't get repaid with a laminated dinner list and a locked-out mother-in-law scrubbing dishes on a bad hip. I told him that the guarantor review would stand, that the studio would need to requalify on its own merit, and that I believed, genuinely, he was capable of building something honest if he stopped funding a fantasy of himself that his wife's parents had never actually respected in the first place. I told him the account had been restructured permanently, not as a punishment but as a boundary, and that boundaries only mean something if you keep them, even when it's your own blood on the other side of them. Then I told him something else. I told him that if he wanted to sit down with me, just him, no Caitlin, no spreadsheet of grievances, and talk about what an honest path forward looked like, I would meet him anywhere, anytime, and I would listen. Because I am not, and never wanted to be, a man who cuts his son off entirely. I only wanted to stop being a man who let his son cut his mother down to nothing and called it tradition. Tyler didn't say much. He nodded. His eyes were wet in a way I hadn't seen since he was small enough to still climb into my lap during thunderstorms. Caitlin, behind him, said nothing at all, and for once, that felt like the most honest thing she'd offered us in 3 years. I drove home slower than I needed to. I wanted the extra time. Carol was in the kitchen when I got back, and for the first time in longer than I could count, she wasn't standing at that counter out of obligation. She was standing there because she wanted to be, humming something I didn't recognize, arranging a small bundle of grocery store carnations in a mason jar because it was the only vase she could find, and the light coming through the window over the sink was doing something soft in gold across the side of her face. I walked over and put my arms around her from behind, and she leaned back into me the way she used to before either of us knew what a hip replacement was, before we knew what it meant to be quietly used by people who mistook our kindness for an open account. "We don't have to host Christmas this year," I told her. "We don't have to host it ever again if you don't want to." She turned around in my arms and looked at me for a long moment. "Maybe just the two of us," she said. "Maybe that's enough." It was. It is. The house was quiet that December, in a way it hadn't been in years. No laminated lists on the cabinet, no caterer's van in the driveway, no daughter-in-law letting herself in with a key. We never asked back, just the two of us, a small tree in the corner, and a turkey breast. Carol insisted on making herself, standing at that same counter, but for the first time in a long time, on her own terms, at her own pace, with her husband beside her instead of upstairs pretending not to notice. Tyler called on Christmas morning. Just him. Just a phone call, quiet and a little unsteady, asking if he could come by sometime in January to talk. Really talk. No Caitlin, no agenda. I told him yes. Carol, listening beside me, squeezed my hand. Some debts get repaid in dollars. Some get repaid slower than that, in the kind of honesty that only shows up once a man has run out of other people's patience to spend.